very upset about because it was so drastically different from its surroundings. And also which had a kind of ideal, a left-wing ideal, if you like, of making culture accessible to everybody, to being kind of non-hierarchical, which certainly the architects, Rogers and Piano, were of the left and would have seen themselves as being revolutionary. So why would a conservative president want to commission a radical building? Because by commissioning a radical building, he can kind of satisfy or help to satisfy the kind of desire for change without having to agree to more fundamental changes in society. And I'm not saying Pompidou Centre is a complete failure. I think what it did for Paris is quite extraordinary. But it did also do what the president wanted it to do, which was to be a kind of palliative. So what in effect happened with the building of this building was it was a negotiation between the president and the architects, who had very different desires, and they kind of both got a bit of what they wanted. And the fact that that could happen was partly because of the ability of architecture to look like it's doing something and then actually do something slightly different. In other words, if it was a really, truly, fundamentally radical building, the president would not have built it. Because it could look and act in some ways like a radical building, it could be built. So now we come to more recent years, and Dubai, which has become this kind of mythical place in city building, in architecture, in the last 10, 15 years, because extraordinary things happen there. And this is a map of Dubai, and the oldest part of the town is around here. I mean, it was just 50 years ago. It was essentially a kind of small fishing town, and also a port with some trading activity, but it was kind of grew up around here. It was a really modest town, but with the coming of oil, it grew, or rather with the rising price of oil. And it expanded very rapidly, but importantly, Dubai does not have as much oil as its neighbors, such as Abu Dhabi. So the ruling family of Dubai wanted to invest in a different kind of future. They knew the oil would run out in Dubai, so they wanted to make Dubai into something else, which was a kind of somewhere a bit like Singapore, which is a kind of city-state that lives off trade and tourism, which encourages people to take their money there, to invest there, to do business, etc., to be a place that was kind of nicely placed between the Western world and the Muslim world, which would not be too extreme for Western investors, but still be attractive to Muslim investors. So they kind of tread a delicate tightrope between different people they need to please. But in order to do this, they had to create an image of the city, or that's how they decided to go about it. They had to do things that would make Dubai famous before it had achieved all the things they wanted to achieve. So it's a great big marketing project, if you like. They wanted people to talk about it all over the world, at which they succeeded, amazingly, to an amazing degree. So they started doing things like building these famous islands in the shape of palms, and proposed further islands and so on, not all of which have been built. And the amazing thing about this image, which says map of Dubai, is it's not all there. It shows some things that have been realized, some things which are on the way, some things which are only projected which may or may not happen in the future. So this palm, this is the first of the palms, Palm Jumeirah, which is there. That's all finished. This is the Palm Dera, which is, I think all the land reclamation is done, but that's it. So it's just a big piece of empty land awaiting development. This is the map of the world, which is mostly all there. I don't think any of this is there. I don't think all of that is there, and so on. So Dubai managed to create this kind of mythology about construction such that people can draw maps where it doesn't really matter if things are there or not, because the sort of myth is as important as the reality. And going along with that, they created this skyline of buildings that refer to sort of Venetian campaniles, the Chrysler Building in New York, the tallest building in the world, which obviously were kind of image building. They used imagery, they used borrowed imagery of Venice, New York, or whatever. It was all part of the kind of grand marketing project. But also, they used the fact that if you build a building, it looks like it's doing something, whether it is or not. So if you build a block of flats, if you build an office block, you can kind of get people to think that there really are people living in the flats, there really is work going on in the offices, whether they are or not. And this fueled a huge speculative bubble where people kept on investing in property in Dubai. And then in 2008, as in many other places, it all crashed, since when they've been picking themselves up again. And then you have things like the Atlantis Hotel, which kind of revels in its sort of fakery, if you like, in its sort of also its vulgarity, its kitschness. So at the same time, one of the attractions is you have an aquarium, you have a real fish tank with real fish, and somehow that's all part of the game, that everything is fake, everything is pretend, and then you have real fish, and somehow that's all part of the power of it. And then property becomes something you see on billboards. So instead of Coca-Cola, Calvin Klein, you have advertisements for property. It becomes a kind of narrative that takes over the whole city. The airports are full of advertisements for property. The newspapers talk about whether or not Donald Trump is going to move into Dubai. And there's a sort of excitement about it. There's a sort of drama. People caught up with it, and so people probably know that a lot of this is sort of fiction and marketing and selling, but they willingly go along with it. But it sort of obscures certain things. One of the things is that it obscures is the difference between the external image, what you see from Google Earth in the case of the palm, or what you see on the skyline in terms of these sort of amazing looking skyscrapers, and the actual experiences at ground level. So this is actually what the famous Palm Jumeirah looks like at ground level, which is not very lovely, partly because they deliberately obscure views of the sea so that you can only have it if you buy a flat there, so you have to kind of buy the view. But in general, the kind of street level quality of experience is considerably less exciting than the images of the buildings. But also, to return to this map, there's a whole other map of Dubai which is not shown here, because Dubai works in a very strange way. The native Emirati population is very much the minority in Dubai. You have expatriates from Europe, America, usually working in the better paid jobs. You have the migrant workers from Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, usually working in the worst paid jobs. You have other people coming from other parts of the Middle East. You have the need to serve all these people from different backgrounds with different degrees of wealth, with different cultural expectations. And the way they manage that is to create a series of zones. So, for example, alcohol is permitted in certain places and not in other places because of the Islamic taboo on alcohol, but the fact that they need to keep the Westerners there, you have to have drink, but in certain restricted ways. Because the government of the United Arab Emirates is essentially dictatorial, it's not democratic, therefore they need to control media, they need to control freedom of the press, but at the same time that's not attractive to businesses in the media. Therefore, they create an enclave within Dubai where different rules apply. If within this enclave, there's much greater freedom than outside it. They create special free trade zones with different trading laws to attract certain kinds of business. And then they have the compounds where the migrant workers live, which are kind of on the edge of the city and generally quite nasty places. So people who come from India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, etc., are put in these fenced-in enclosures and only allowed out to work on the construction sites. And so the place is managed on a basis of separation, and we're talking literally about zones with fences around them. All the things I just described are all things with boundaries, but you would have no idea whatsoever, looking at this map, where they are. I mean, they are there. You could draw lines on here that would show them, but this map, nor any other map that I'm aware of, actually shows them all. So, and this slide is called the true map of Dubai, and I've just written the words because it doesn't exist. So the ability of built form, of architecture and cities to communicate one set of images through their external appearance, and then to do something completely different from the way that they're organized and structured and planned, in the case of Dubai, enables a very high level of deception between what people look at and what's actually going on. And in this particular case, the spectacle, the architectural spectacle of Dubai works as a distraction. So everybody looks at the Palm, looks at the Burj Khalifa, the tallest building in the world. Everybody talks about it. That's what people write articles about. It also supports financial speculation. It's a marketing tool, as I said, and it also supports things like money laundering. So money with dodgy origins from different places can get invested in a building and kind of made to look all right through the power of architecture, partly. However, I'm not saying this is this potential deceptiveness of buildings is something that you should simply is purely a bad thing, or that buildings should be completely and utterly transparent and honest, because I don't think people live like that. I think everybody needs masks to some extent, because it's actually impossible to completely reveal all the aspects, all the forces behind a building. So it's more of a question of being aware of this, what's going on, and possibly thinking of strategies, ways of dealing with it in ways that are not purely kind of fraudulent. And I'm going to show two examples one is sort of partly accidental and one is more designed. This is the partly accidental version. There's a large area of West London that was built in the 1840s, 1850s, 1860s. Massive speculative boom, massive expansion of the city. This kind of building is you find in a lot of British cities and in different versions a lot of European cities. And these houses were built essentially for well-off people. But there was a property bubble that a lot of them were never occupied by the people for whom they were designed. They tended to become divided up very rapidly into multiple occupancy. So the residents, in fact, were low income. Over the course of time, they became slums. Some of them, there were some sort of fairly appalling practices, notorious practices by landlords against their tenants. It also became a bohemian, artistic district. And then, I'm talking of a span of about 100 years here. And then, over the last 30 years, finally the values started going up again, and now it is a very, very expensive area. So finally, the posh people for whom it was designed have come to live there. And, for example, the British Prime Minister lives there, and quite a lot of his ministers do, and they're probably the poorest people in the neighbourhood. And that's what Notting Hill looked like in the 1950s, and that's what it looks like now. It's not quite the same part of West London in the two pictures, but they're near enough, and you can see this very dramatic difference between what are essentially the same types of buildings, and what's changed is the income levels, the amount of money of the people who live in them. And so these buildings have shown an ability to sustain, as architecture, as planning, they've shown an ability to sustain an amazing amount of different lives, and I think they're quite remarkable in that. And it's happened quite a lot by accident. It's not because the people who designed them were incredible visionaries, but somehow something worked about these places. And I would say that an important part of that is there is some kind of understanding in the design of them about the difference between appearance and reality. And in a very simple, quite crude way, which is that you have these elevations made of painted stucco, as it's called in England, which create some kind of idea of sort of dignity, of order, of the street, of propriety. And then behind them you have these brick backs with a very unapologetic cut between them, between this stage set, if you like, and the stuff that's behind, which is where people lead their lives. If you go back to this picture, you see again this stage set, this facade, and then you see the backs, which are actually things that people can mess around with, change a great deal, adapt to their personal circumstances. So if they get divided up into flats, that happens quite easily. If they get undivided again, that can happen easily. If you want to have artists and drug addicts or whoever else living there, you can. The appearance on the street doesn't change that much. So in a very basic way, this kind of architecture allows for the need for a kind of mask, for a disguise, if you like, and the need for different kind of realities to happen behind it. And I'm going to finish with Lina Bobardi, who was a Italian-born Brazilian architect who moved to Brazil in 1946 and died in 1992 and built a series of remarkable buildings in Sao Paulo, where she lived, and Salvador de Bahia. I'm going to talk about one building in particular. This is the Museum of Art in Sao Paulo, MASP, and it was commissioned by someone called Assis de Chateaubriand, or Cheto was his nickname, and he was a business tycoon. He was almost a gangster. He used very dubious methods to raise very large amounts of money, but he also wanted to sort of give something back to the city. So his kind of ego, his greed, was combined with also a desire to in some way be a benefactor, to give. And he built up an incredible collection of art with the help of Lina Bo Bardi's husband, who was an art dealer. And she got to design the building in a way that might be thought a bit improper. She got the job because her husband was the director of the art gallery, which is sort of not the way you're supposed to procure major public buildings. Nonetheless, what she did was to turn that situation, the situation of this dubious billionaire and his ego, into something which I think you can say is really for the public. And that was her concern. And I'll just describe the building quickly to you. It's, as you see, it's a glass box with these kind of concrete frames holding it off the ground with this space underneath. Sorry, this will be more helpful. So big concrete frames, glass box, and then underneath there's this huge space that's totally open. And then beneath that there's further parts of the complex there. This space allows a view from this park out to, there's quite a great view going that way. And then this space underneath, all sorts of things can happen there, like markets. That's the space with not much happening in it. Concerts. She wants it to be a popular space. And then above that, so up here is the main space for exhibiting art. And here you have this incredible collection of old masters and 20th century painting. And she displayed it on these glass panels, partly such that they would be as they were to the artist in the studio, on an easel, that the painting is a physical object in a space that you walk around, rather than a thing on the wall that you look at as if it's a window. So that was a kind of very important idea for her. Also, that the business of people walking around looking at the pictures becomes part of the experience. So you're not just looking at the paintings, you're looking at other people looking at paintings. And she commissioned this series of photographs to kind of make the point about how she did these little kind of games of people, real people, and paintings in the same view. So she got a photographer to take pictures like this. And this building is a very kind of honest building in the modernist sense. It's made of concrete. You can see it's made of concrete. You can see what's holding it up. There's no decoration, etc. There's no disguise. But at the same time, Lina Bo Bardi was herself actually very interested in theatre and very interested in various forms of traditional art and ritual that involved people dressing up, disguising themselves, masks. So it's not just about pure structural honesty. It is a place of manifestation, of performance, where people kind of show themselves in a theatrical way, and then the ultimate purpose is to show the art, which of course, you know, the art is itself, in some sense, about illusion, about showing things that are not really there. And she, by displaying them in this way, she did bring out their quality of artifacts as things painted, as things made on an easel. But she also made them into sort of kind of fictional people. She made them into kind of almost animated entities. She also brought out their illusory quality. So I think what is interesting about this project is that it shows how the deceptive properties, if you like, of architecture can be combined at the same time as this idea of honesty, of showing things how they are, can be worked together in a way that is actually kind of enriching of life, that is not really, it's not about lying, it's not about deceiving people, but it's about giving people a kind of bigger understanding of the world and enriching their experiences. So I'll leave you with this picture, which I think is a kind of nice summation of the idea of the true fake. You have a real person, you have a fake person, and the one is like a kind of mask for the other. So thank you very much. And,
something that is not in the presentation, but it's something that is linked somehow to truth and fakery, is I'm very interested in your views about the rhetorics of contemporary architects.
mm-hmm.
The way, you know, how rhetorics are important, the speech, the manifestos that they have for a single project or for a series of projects, and how this rhetorics correspond or not correspond
Okay.
to reality, and how these rhetorics are used to get commissions, to get buildings built. I think of the Zavish, liberate people.
Yeah, well, I mean, architects have to sell themselves. They're in a market, and one of the ways they like to sell themselves is by having a kind of rhetoric, by saying that my way of doing architecture is the best way of doing architecture because it's going to change the world in some way, because it represents some sort of reality about our times that nobody else represents in the same way. And an example is the rhetoric of the Pompidou Centre and of Richard Rogers and of what was then called high-tech architecture, this idea that because you want flexibility, because we live in fast-moving times, because things are always changing, so you have to have an architecture that looks as if it can change.